Hi, I'm Lisa Dixon. I'm a psychiatrist and the director of the Center for Practice Innovations and professor of psychiatry at Columbia University Medical Center. And together with Rebecca Briney, the statewide director of AOT services, we'll be presenting Our presentation will have 4 objectives. The first is to specify the regional and statewide leadership and standard communication paths for the management of assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT. We're also going to highlight SAFE Act updates to AOT. We'll be highlighting issues and challenges related to managing the AOT timeline. And finally, I am going to highlight some clinical perspectives as a psychiatrist on AOT orders and their implementation. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Rebecca Briney. I'm the statewide AOT director for the New York State Office of Mental Health, and I'll be covering our first 2 objectives for today's presentation. And the first one really is important to us because we want to make sure you know who we are and what our role is with assisted outpatient treatment. So we have a few introductory slides that give you contact information and fill you in on who your regional representative is for your county. We think that information is important. These slides we hope you will use as a reference that you'll share with other staff in your county who handle AOT records, who participate in the process. And we also, towards the end of the presentation, have a summary slide that gives you the website link that also has this information. We work very hard to keep that up to date, and we would love to hear from you. So it gives you contact information where you could share your ideas, give us feedback about this training, share your ideas for what would be more helpful for a future training. We would really love to stay in better communication with county-level AOT staff. So this first objective is really to spend just a couple of minutes introducing you to who we are, what our role is, and how you can stay connected with us. So these are the statewide staff that represent this umbrella structure that we want you to use as a resource. I'm the statewide director. My email address is there. We have Nancy Pepp, who is our legal guru, so to speak, on all things AOT. So Nancy is somebody who we really encourage county attorneys to get to know. MHLS sometimes has questions. Nancy can be helpful when situations arise that are not specifically or explicitly addressed in 960. She may have had similar examples come up from other counties. When AOT was new in '99, a lot of things have changed since then. There was no way that the drafters could have anticipated all of the various complicated scenarios that you all deal with daily in your work with AOT. And so Nancy can be a great resource for helping tease out if the direction that the county is going is consistent with assisted outpatient treatment. So Nancy is a great resource in that regard. We are Albany-based. We mentioned this because originally the statewide director was New York City-based. We have kind of a new team that's in Albany. That number gets you to us, and we would encourage you and anybody who handles AOT in your county to use that number fairly liberally. We will show you in a minute the regional staff that are really a tremendous resource to you, but in the event you want to talk to us directly about an issue or a systems issue emerging in your locality, we would be very happy to hear from any of you. So the statewide team, these are the regional representatives for each of the 5 regions in New York State. So this pattern is consistent with OMH's field office structure. There's an AOT representative with a legislatively defined role in each of these 5 field offices. So every county has one of these folks assigned to represent them and their interest in AOT. Again, these are folks with a legislatively defined role. I'm sure you're familiar with the term AOT Regional Program Coordinator. These folks have a responsibility for making sure that anything in an AOT order, any AOT treatment plan that you've approved and signed off on, that gets implemented just as you had expected it to be implemented. So these folks are going to be your resource to making sure that happens and making sure that corrective action takes place timely if that's needed. Communication flow. We have put some mechanisms in place to make sure that we can stay connected with what's happening on the ground at the county level. And we do that in a number of ways. The first is that we meet as a statewide team with the list of folks you saw in the earlier slide, as well as Nancy, our legal rep. We have a monthly video teleconference, and that's an opportunity to share a network across regions to see, if a particular issue is happening in one region, is it also happening in another? We compare notes, we problem solve, and we use that as a mechanism to make sure that AOT is still being implemented consistently statewide. Quarterly in-person meetings, we do those as well because that face-to-face interaction really lends itself to more of a problem-solving discussion. It gives us access to experts in Albany, so as the millions of changes that are happening in the healthcare system currently that I'm sure you're hearing about that are intended to provide better care across the board, better healthcare. AOT needs to kind of be inserted into all of those new changes and to make sure that what we're doing related to AOT doesn't get forgotten about as we're moving to managed care, as other parts of the system are changing. So those quarterly meetings let us do that and keep everyone informed. The piece that you should be especially interested in is that similar meetings are held at the regional level. So locally, closer to where you're doing your routine day-to-day work, we send invites. Your regional rep sends an invite to all of the directors of community services in your region. And it encourages them to liberally have staff join in, county attorneys. Anybody who plays a role with AOT in your county is welcome to come to that regional meeting. And they also solicit input. So if you establish a connection and a relationship with your regional AOT rep, feel free to give them input about things you think that should be on that regional meeting, things that have come up in the courtroom, things that have come up as a problem that seems specific to your county that you want that addressed at your regional meeting. We would be happy to address that and make sure that your needs are heard. The last point is that communication flow within the county. We often hear questions that really are at the discretion of the county DCS. That leads us to believe that potentially procedures at the county level need to be more widely known, more widely discussed. And so we encourage you to think about what's the communication flow within your own county. Let's talk for a minute about information sharing regarding AOT and AOT documents. There's something very simple that you, your court clerk, anyone who handles AOT documents could do that would tremendously improve the efficiency of all things AOT, and that is to use this dedicated fax account line. So every regional field office rep that I mentioned earlier has a secure AOT fax account line that's on the slide there that goes directly to them electronically and only to them. No one needs to worry about something sitting in a fax machine. It allows for them to file things in a paperless way. They can enter those AOT court documents into our data system much more efficiently. And one of the reasons this is so important is that we are required to report to the legislature on AOT. And the sooner that you can share these documents with us, the more accurate our data is on our public website for people who are trying to learn about AOT and fulfilling our legislative requirement. Occasionally we'll get inquiries where somebody says, it looks like this data may be a little old. And so this simple fix of using these dedicated fax lines can really improve the efficiency of our business. And we would like for this to be the only method for sharing AOT documents with your regional AOT rep. So we'll move on to the second objective that Lisa mentioned regarding the SAFE Act that Governor Cuomo promulgated in March of 2013. You're probably familiar with the SAFE Act. Along with it came 6 amendments to Kendra's law that were issued as part of the SAFE Act, or the Secure Ammunition and Firearm Enforcement Act. The first one is the length of the order, and we feel like it's important to highlight these for you because if you've been doing AOT for a long time, a lot of the timeframes have become routine, and these are some fairly significant changes to AOT. The first one being the length of the initial order. All of the language in 960 previously was up to 6 months, as I'm sure you're aware, and it's now up to 1 year. So there is additional latitude for that initial order to be extended. Dr. Dixon will talk more about clinical nuances related to deciding how long that order should be. The second one relates to transfers across counties. So this amendment made it more explicit that directors of community services in a receiving county have the same responsibility as a director of community service who may have initiated that AOT order in another county. So there is sometimes confusion about responsibilities when more than one county is involved, and this amendment was designed to basically make it clear that orders follow people across counties, and we've developed a form in our guidance tab on our website that Dr. Dixon will review with you towards the end of the presentation that shows how you can implement that responsibility, that new change to Kendra's Law. The third item that we want to explain is that Central New York Psychiatric Center also has a role with these amendments to the SAFE Act. And this one speaks specifically to Central New York's role in providing inpatient psychiatric care. They also provide outpatient psychiatric care, as you know, in the prison system. This particular bullet refers only to people who may be finishing their state sentence while they're getting inpatient psychiatric care at Central New York Psychiatric Center. They are required to be screened for AOT prior to going to the community from that inpatient setting. These last three we'll review. The first one, formalizing the DCS role in evaluating the need for AOT. So this made it much more explicit that DCSs have a responsibility to carefully review and consider any AOT order that's expiring and make a thoughtful, careful decision about whether that or not that order should be renewed. I think we're all familiar with bad outcomes, things that have happened where violence may have occurred with somebody who has a serious mental illness, and questions often get raised. Why were they not on AOT? They used to be on AOT. Why are they not on AOT now? This really, seems to have been implemented to avoid that question. We're always going to know why somebody may not have been renewed. And there's a requirement that the DCS share with your regional rep in writing whether or not that AOT order will be renewed. The next point relates to the fact that orders can be renewed even if an AOT client happens to be missing at the time that their order is expiring. So there are a number of procedures in place for locating somebody on AOT who's missing and a number of requirements. But this was really included to make sure that it's not a reason to decide somebody no longer needs AOT. If they temporarily can't be located, the DCS can certainly go ahead and renew that order as long as they've documented diligent efforts to get an exam completed. This last amendment to Kendra's Law as part of SAFE Act makes it clear that orders remain in effect as long as a AOT order has been applied for in advance of the expiration. So as long as the DCS has made it clear that they plan to renew, even if the court hearing hasn't happened yet, that original order remains in effect and there's no break in that AOT service. And with that, I will turn things back to Lisa, who is going to describe some clinical perspectives on AOT, as well as the importance of some of the timelines that are required under assisted outpatient treatment.
Thanks, Rebecca. We're going to conclude with the last two objectives, and just to remind you, we want to highlight issues and challenges related to following the AOT timeline, and then highlight some clinical perspectives on AOT orders and implementation. Okay, we're going to start with the challenge of meeting the AOT timelines. Hearings need to be scheduled within 3 days of filing of the petition or the renewal. Very, very important. And what we've experienced is that repeated adjournments and delays unfortunately compromise the implementation of the order and really ultimately for the whole process to do what it's supposed to do to protect the individuals in society. Serving the signed final orders to the DCS enables them to meet their statutory responsibilities. And finally, one of the things that, again, that we've learned is that courts that have a routine schedule for AOT hearings and routine staff to manage the AOT process can really help facilitate the predictability of the schedule and executing the timelines properly and optimally. So now we're going to talk a little bit about renewing an order, which again touches on issues of timeline, but then which also moves into some clinical issues as well. In renewing an order, the examining physician makes a clinical determination on whether to renew the AOT order. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on because that's not an easy decision to make. But it's important to realize that renewal of the order does not require that the individual meet either the 36-month or 48-month criteria regarding previous hospitalization or acts of violence. Those apply at the initiation of an order, but they do not apply at the renewal of the order. And nota bene, timing is key here in the renewal of an order. The DCS must apply to renew the order prior to the expiration of the current order. If that doesn't happen, and the order is allowed to expire, the next order is no longer considered a renewal, but rather an initial petition, and then the criteria regarding violence and hospitalization do apply. And that can really hurt someone, because what if someone has really been benefiting from an AOT order, they're doing great, but they need the order, they need an ongoing order. If they don't then meet the criteria, the 36-month hospitalization or 48-month criteria, they wouldn't be able to continue AOT. And that can really be a problem, and that can have an impact. The order can continue to be renewed as long as the individual continues to meet all the other criteria and it is clinically determined that he or she is likely to benefit from the order. And the assessment of likely to benefit is complex, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the criteria for renewal of an order does not require an episode of non-compliance or the initiation during the initial phase of a removal order. So again, we're thinking about what makes someone likely to benefit from ongoing AOT. And again, I want to emphasize that, as a psychiatrist, I'm not looking, for an episode of non-compliance necessarily to justify it. There are many other things that can contribute to the evaluation that a person can continue to benefit from AOT. The examining physician makes a clinical determination and considers in that determination the level of risk associated with a variety of past behaviors. And in assessing the likelihood of benefit, the clinician must consider a range of issues, and that includes awareness of the disorder, awareness of how the requirements of AOT are contributing to that person's stability. The appreciation of illness. Does the individual even have a sense that they have an illness that might be causing behaviors that are hurting others or hurting themselves? If they don't have an appreciation of that illness, it's unlikely that without the AOT order, they're going to necessarily be able to continue to, in some sense, make a recovery. The psychiatrist also has to consider the impact of the order on behavior. And if the order, for example, is really allowing someone who may have doubts about an illness or may have doubts about whether they want to take medicine, if it sort of tips them over into saying, maybe I'll do it, maybe this is helping me, then we want to keep that AOT order in place. It's a very complicated, challenging, and really serious decision to make. And what I want to emphasize is it really can't be reduced to some simple yes, no, the person had noncompliance or the person had a removal. It really requires thoughtfulness and I think really dialogue with the team about, and the individual, about what the AOT order is doing and how it's functioning in their lives. The length of the order requested takes into account the treatment team's experience with that individual and the expectation of what will occur in that time frame. So, again, it's this very complicated consideration of will the person be likely to benefit and for how long? And I'll acknowledge, I think anyone would acknowledge that there's no hard science to this, and this really does require judgment and consideration. But again, it can't be reduced to a simple yes, no, categorical kind of consideration. Now that we've covered the challenges of renewing an order, we wanted to talk a little bit about something that's a common confusion. And the confusion is that Assisted outpatient treatment, AOT, is not the same as assertive community treatment, ACT or ACT. And these can be confused, and it's not surprising that they would be confusing. And we'll talk about why for a moment. So AOT is, again, as you know, a county-operated referral and monitoring program that does not provide direct treatment. It's really a status or a condition or a set of rules. ACT, or ACT, assertive community treatment, in contrast, is treatment. It's an evidence-based practice which has been shown in many, many studies to reduce hospitalization and improve outcomes of people with serious mental illness who don't benefit from traditional treatment. It is an evidence-based practice in which a community-based treatment team that goes out into the field, into the community, that provides care management, psychiatric care, and clinical services. So many, but not all, AOT clients receive ACT services, and some AOT clients just receive care management. Not all AOT clients receive ACT services. And in addition, many, but not all, ACT clients are on AOT orders. So there are many, many ACT clients who don't have AOT orders. And any given ACT team will have some proportion of their clients who are on AOT orders and some who aren't. And so it's important to understand that they're not the same thing, and this is a very, very common confusion. So now that we've established that ACT is not AOT and AOT is not ACT, I want to talk a little bit about the AOT process from the perspective of a psychiatrist. I'm a psychiatrist. I've worked on ACT teams. I've worked with individuals who have serious mental illnesses who are on a variety of legal statuses and challenges. And it's important to realize that overall there is a shortage of psychiatrists who are comfortable doing this work, who are capable of doing this work, and who are interested in doing this work that involves interconnecting with the AOT process. And because of that, the time for court appearances is very, very precious. The psychiatrists who work with these kind of systems and who are able to provide testimony and understand the rules are very, very limited. The limited time leads to challenges in coordinating the court schedule with the physician's availability. So they may have 100 clients that they're trying to see. They may be having to do 3 or 4 other evaluations, and then they have to be in court. And it's made worse or more challenging because nobody can stand in for the psychiatrist who's actually done the examination. They are the only ones who can provide that testimony. So it really creates a potential gridlock that can end up wasting a lot of people's time, all the different participants in the process. And so I think the more that we can standardize and anticipate those kind of problems, the more efficient the process is going to be, and actually the better we're going to be able to care for these people who require AOT. And I wanted to make one last point about the process of providing testimony and even doing an evaluation. As a physician, we routinely obtain and utilize information that we read in the clinical record. The clinical record, is a legal document. We'll read about conversations between another staff member and a patient. We'll read about the history. We'll review past notes, past hospital discharge summaries. That's actually part of our job. The knowledge that we get from reviewing the chart contributes to our assessment and our testimony. And so it's very, very important that judges understand that a psychiatrist or a physician may refer to something that they have read in the chart and that might play a role in the physician's assessment of the individual. Finally, there are a number of clinical challenges in working with people who have AOT orders. And some of the practices that we routinely use can really be misunderstood, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Disorders that are experienced by people with AOT orders have a range of evidence-based medication treatments. So we're talking about psychosis, we're talking about depression, we're talking about mania. And we actually have very, very powerful medications to address these symptoms. But one of the things we know, and we know this not just from people with psychiatric disorders, but we know this from really people who are taking medications for a whole variety of disorders, is that most people have difficulty with adherence or taking medication as prescribed. I mean, I personally, myself, when I have to take a course of antibiotics or have to take some medication, may miss doses. The problem is that if you're a person with an AOT order and who has evinced symptoms that may be dangerous or problematic, the consequences of that non-adherence may be quite grave and significant. And so because of that, not just for people with AOT orders, but really for all individuals who have to take medication regularly and chronically, we've developed strategies to help people remain adherent to medications. And long-acting medications, which are sometimes injectable, there's actually some long-acting medications that go under the skin, can help people remain adherent to medication in a number of disorders. And the reason we wanted to focus on this is that it's easy to think about the requirement to take medication or to take long-acting medication, injectable medication, as some kind of punishment, some kind of way to force somebody to do something that they don't want to do. And I want to make the point that, at least in my clinical experience, it can have completely the opposite effect. So if you think about it, you have a mental illness, you don't want to have a mental illness, you don't like having a mental illness, and if you have to take a pill 3 times a day or twice a day or every day in order to control that illness, it can be very, very upsetting and distressing and actually reinforce the feeling of stigma and sadness that an individual may have. Whereas if you can get an injection once a month, once every 2 months, once every 3 months, think about how that can really free up somebody to live without this constant reminder that they have a mental disorder that requires treatment. And so, more often than not, in my experience, the people with whom I work who take long-acting medications find that it makes their life easier. They don't have to be constantly worrying about it. They don't have to be hassled about it. And they can kind of live their lives without having to always be mindful that they have a mental disorder. And obviously this doesn't happen, with every single person, but clinically, when I work with people who need to take long-acting medications, say, for example, if they have an AOT order, that's the approach I take, is to help them to see that this is actually a liberating requirement as opposed to an imprisoning requirement. And it really does work that way. I want to finish by reminding you that there is an AOT manual of sorts and online resources. The OMH AOT, or Assisted Outpatient Treatment Portal, has been updated. You can see the link in the slide. It has state and county contact information. It has all the SAFE Act updates, including AOT forms that we've discussed. And there's a guidance tab that has been added that gives information about transfers across counties, about AOT care management and Health Home Plus resources, and also reporting requirements. So I'm going to conclude by summarizing that there are many clinical challenges, there are many organizational challenges, there are structural challenges in the implementation of AOT, including optimally using the contributions of psychiatry and understanding clinical decision-making around AOT renewal decisions. And we're very grateful to you all for the work that you do in helping us implement these AOT orders. On behalf of myself and Rebecca Briney, thank you for your attention.